sir, we promised you a great main event here tonight.
Now I want a nice, clean game. From all of you.
That's great.
Some call us the R word.
Yeah, even has moments of integrity.
But this has been awesome, and we should do this again.
You're funny.
Are you not entertained?
The ATF murdering people.
Is this not why you are here?
With the plan to exterminate the Jews of Europe.
A radical libertarian.
Things on homosexuality and stuff, or just the petty little things that
I'm gonna hop in here real quick.
Like, fucking yes, obviously I did that. And I...
If not all the world is watching.
Welcome to Fite Club.
This is FSM.
Hello, fighters. Welcome back to Fight Club. We've got a great match on the card between two very esteemed gentlemen in the Liberty Movement, a heavyweight bout, if you will. And we're going to steal some functionality from Dan Smots from the System is Down podcast. So if you want me to see what you're typing in the chat, put in all caps, fake super chat. That way I can tell the difference between what you're trying to say to us and what you're just the inevitable autistic arguments that are going to be happening in there. As always, don't forget to like the video, share it around to all your friends, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a great interview or debate here on Free Speech Media. We'll bring our fighters into the ring in just a moment, but first, a quick word from our sponsors. First up, as always, you know them, you love them, Blood of Tyrants Wine. They now have a brand new energy tea, Liquid Freedom. Will have you feeling refreshed and energized to go out and fight for liberty all day long. Or if you're looking for a nice night in while sipping on the blood and tears of your enemies and supporting the destruction of the tyrannical state, look no further than Blood of Tyrants Wine. Choose between a Merlot and a Pinot Grigio, or both. Distributed by activists you know and love, bloodoftyrants.wine is the place to go. Use promo code FSM to get 10% off your first order. Again, that is bloodoftyrants.wine, promo code FSM. This episode is also brought to you by Crafton Business Services. Crafton is dedicated to helping entrepreneurs start, grow, and maintain their businesses by providing a wide variety of products and services to make your business more efficient, manageable, and profitable. Now, Crafton understands how frustrating getting your business off the ground can be, and that's why they've put together their business-in-a-box solutions to turn your idea or side hustle into a fully functioning company in one place for one transparent cost. So for under $1,000, you get your corporate filing, registered agents, a logo, business cards, marketing strategy, accounting consultation to get you started off on the right foot. All of that is just $9.99 plus state theft. And if you're looking for a little bit more than that, you can add a custom website, web hosting, more marketing material, more time with the marketing team, 5 times the bookkeeping services, and your first box of business cards for $24.99, again, plus state theft. If you already have a business, Crafton can help you grow to new levels with targeted marketing campaigns, affiliate programs, website and social media redesigns, and more, or help make your business less of a headache with streamlined accounting, tax prep, and compliance. So go on over to crafton.us, use promo code FSM again to help support the network and the show. And if you like what you're seeing, check out our newest sponsor on the network, MyArkit. Save your digital legacy for generations. Don't just save your pictures where they are at risk of being censored, deleted, or lost. MyArkit gives you security and privacy at a great price while telling the whole story in your own voice and writing. Unlike a typical cloud backup to just dump all of your random pictures, MyArkit has you upload one full memory at a time. A picture or short video post with text and or audio captions create a timeline that makes going back through your memories an easy and pleasant experience for you and your loved ones. Sign up for a 30-day trial today and see what the craze is all about. No payment info necessary. This is actually a true free trial. So go to myarkit.com and again, promo code FSM. That's myarkit.com, promo code FSM. Without further ado, we've got our wonderful guests this evening. Introducing first, on the left, former vice chair of the LNC, the one and only Mr. Ken Moulton. And on the right, J.D., Ph.D., and founder of or inventor of the maneuver of his own name, Mr. Dr. Chuck Moulton. Gentlemen, welcome to the fight.
Hey, thanks for having us. And I'll note that Chuck is also a former vice chair.
Yeah, we're both former vice chairs of the National Party and both former vice chairs of this current bylaws committee. Well, I'm the current vice chair and he's the former vice chair. So yeah, a lot in common.
Fair enough. That was before my time. I honestly didn't know that you were on the LNC.
Many years
Was
ago.
that 08, Chuck, or was that 08 to 10? I can't remember.
So I was a regional alternate 2004 to 2006, and then 2006 to 2008 I was the vice chair of the national committee.
Nice. So to start off, I will have you guys just explain to the audience what your bylaw proposal does, starting off with Ken.
Okay. So mine's a bit more of a framework shift than the alternative. So just kind of start there. Essentially, what I'm looking to do is break the LNC into two bodies. The first body would be a smaller body that would be more flexible, more able to do things quickly, more nimble, and be somewhere between 4 and 7 people. Be the 4 officers plus up to 3 additional people, as long as they actually have a title and duties, because just having people on a committee to be there is, in my opinion, not the right way. That small body, instead of being elected by the convention at large, would actually be appointed or hired, in this case, by a larger body, the second body, which is made up of people from 1 person from each state party. That person would be either elected by the state party according to their bylaws, or in absence of any other mechanism, it would be the state chair by default. And if the state chair doesn't want to do it, whoever the state chair appoints. So basically a backstop, but somehow 1 person from each state ends up on that committee, each affiliate. And they are basically there to do very few things, because a body of 51 people will be slow, it will be painful, and it is not there for doing day-to-day work. It is there to oversee, hold the reins, and hold the very small body, which is very nimble and very fast, but also quick to do bad things, right? It could do quickly that way, to hold that in check. Additionally, the small body, I envision actually being able to be paid. So essentially it would take the top levels of the party, the chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer, and make those professional positions within the party. The chair would remain the CEO. The vice chair would become the COO, the chief operating officer. The treasurer would be the chief financial officer, and the secretary would be the chief knowledge officer, which, if you look that up, literally looks like what a secretary does. From there, again, up to 3 more people at the will of the larger body board can be hired. They form the top tier of staff. Those people would be empowered to additionally hire additional people within the constraints of the budget, as that smaller board decides is necessary. The larger board would basically also take on the job of the judicial committee, because they would be the voice of the states. They can undo anything the small body does. They can hire and fire them at any time for any reason. They are at-will employees of the smaller board. What is the other thing they do? They also hold an up or down vote on any on the annual budget. So no deliberation, because dear Lord, deliberation will be painful in a 51-member board. No, just no. And so it's an up or down vote. The only thing really deliberative they would do is if there is the need to disaffiliate a state, or consider the disaffiliation or affiliation of a state. And honestly, that should be painful. That should not be something entered into willy-nilly. And it should not be something that should come up very often, right? In my time in the party, it's been 1 time. I mean, and only contemporaneously, only relatively recently, that we've actually booted somebody. So I do believe that process should be very painful on purpose. So that's basically the large body does those 4 things, and that's it. They control the party through the budget and through the ability to hire and fire the small board. The small board does the day-to-day, staff runs the whole show, that's basically the vision there. And the idea behind that philosophically is that the LNC is a body that it becomes a confederation of the state parties, right? It's really a clearinghouse for the state parties, rather than, hey, the national putting things down onto the states. It really becomes more of the states working together through that national organization to the betterment of the majority of the state parties. And of course, not everybody's going to play nice. We're libertarians. It happens. Sometimes people don't want to play at all. But regardless, it is, in my opinion, better than what we have today, because it does make the focus, and it inherently focuses the national party on what are the needs of the affiliates. And then we know from our experience that the affiliates have, the county affiliates are the ones where we actually do win, right? That's where we actually have wins today in city councils and at county level. We can win those offices over and over if we just, spread out, and especially in the smaller counties. Not large counties, that's a whole other story, but the smaller offices is where we can win. So if we keep pushing the focus down, we'll get more wins. More wins means more liberty, generally. So that's it. I apologize. It's kind of a big framework shift, and that's why it takes a minute to explain, but there you go.
All right. Dr. Moulton.
Okay, so before I get into the framework change, let me just talk a bit about our existing framework. So our existing LNC is elected, all of them are elected to the National Convention every 2 years. So we have 4 officers, a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, and a treasurer, who are elected by the delegates. We have 5 at-large members who are elected by the delegates. And then we have regions. And these regions are formed by states joining together. They need to join together in regions that have at least 1/10 of the membership. So realistically, that caps the number of regions. So you can form a region that has more than 10%. So it could have 20% or 30% and have more representatives as a result. But realistically, it caps the number of regional representatives at 9. And sometimes there are 8. Each of these regional representatives gets an alternate. Those alternates have full access to board information. So they are on the email list, for example, and often they freely substitute during meetings. So what this effectively means is you have an LNC with a membership size that is 4 officers, that's 4, plus the 5 at large. So 4 plus 5 is 9. And then you have 9 regional representatives. 9 plus 9 is 18. And you could have 9 alternates who also participate to some extent. That brings the number up to 27. That is a lot of voices. So one of the main reasons for advancing the proposal that I propose is to shrink the size of that LNC, because that's too many voices. Just when you have so many voices, everyone wants to be heard on every particular topic, and having so many people speaking up does not lead to better results. It just takes more time to get things done. And this has been studied a lot in the context of nonprofit boards, in the context of corporate boards, and it's just unheard of to have a board of this size. So what the proposal does is it shrinks the size of the LNC to a more manageable level. And recommended board sizes you see in most of the literature is something like 7 to 12. This proposal shrinks the size of the board to 11. And it does this by eliminating all regional representatives, just having the at-large plus the officers, but we add 2 at-large members. So instead of having 5 at-large, we would now have 7. So 7 at-large plus the 4 officers, 4 officers, same as before, gets us to 11. This shrinks the size of the board, which I believe, and many people believe, would lead to a better functioning board. At the same time, there's a concern that this board adequately represents many different viewpoints. So we changed the method of election of the at-large representatives. Currently, we elect those representatives through approval voting, which I am not a fan of at all. Approval voting lets a bare majority run the table and pick every single representative to the exclusion of minority viewpoints, the minority being 49% theoretically. So we actually switched from majority voting, single, I forget what it's called, like single past the post or something like that, to approval voting in 2014 when I chaired the bylaws committee. I strongly opposed this, but I couldn't really speak up because I was running the gavel at the time. So unfortunately, I was so charismatic running the gavel that this passed, and we have been saddled with approval voting for several years now. So this proposal would change us from approval voting to cumulative voting, and cumulative voting basically lets you lets each delegate have a number of votes that is equal to the number of people or the number of openings, and they can allocate them however they want. They could vote since there's 7 openings, they could vote for 7 people, but if they wanted to, they could put all 7 of their votes into one person. This type of voting system, which has been widely studied, often in the context of corporate boards, where shareholders vote with this type of system, leads to it better facilitates minority representation. So it's much less likely that a minority viewpoint can find themselves with no representation at all. So what the intended result of the system is to have a smaller board that functions better, but still allows those minority viewpoints that can make those voices heard. So that's the basic setup. I can get into some arguments in favor of it, or I could just kind of stop here and we can get into the arguments in more detail. I don't know what the moderator would favor here.
Yeah, let's so I have my first question for you gentlemen is slightly antagonistic. But I have to ask it. What do you guys consider the chances of this passing in DC as it stands currently? Either of them.
I mean, I'll start with mine, and I feel as though that mine would come as a floor amendment at this point, motion from the floor. I feel as though there is enough opposition from the people that will be running the convention that someone will attempt to, use parliamentary procedure to stop it from being heard. So I think that that's the realistic. I mean, based on what I've heard, I think that is how that would go down. That someone would try to make a ruling that it is a general revision rather than an amendment, because it does. Our bylaws today are kind of a mess, and there's stuff scattered all over the place. So to clean all that up, it does require amending multiple sections, multiple articles in the bylaws, and unfortunately, that's where they'll get the grounds to do that, and then it'll be a matter of having to overturn the ruling of the chair, and it's going to be a big debacle. And there's an alternative that's been pushed, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But honestly, I'm not one to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I like this system. I like the idea of the 2 boards, the ability to have the ultimate immediate accountability, because the chairs are accountable to their states, or whoever that person is from the states, they're accountable to their people, and then the small board is immediately accountable to the board made up of the state parties. So there's not that 2-year gap in between, but I don't think it's going to happen. I will say real quick, and something I wanted to note is that Chuck and I agree. Listen, I immensely respect Dr. Moulton, and I hope he feels the same for me. We've been around a long time. We could go through our resumes. I prefer we don't, because I think Chuck's is longer than mine. So I'll do a resume comparison there. But the point is that we agree that we both agree approval voting doesn't end in good results, right? And we actually switched to cumulative voting in Kentucky, and used it to nominate our delegates this year, and it went very well. I think it worked out really, really well to make sure that there was a good balance. we did it a little bit differently. We allocated 3 times the number of people to be elected, so you could kind of move things around. I think it was 3 times, or it's 1.5 times the number of people to be elected, rounded up to the nearest whole number. And that way we had a little extra fluff. I really like cumulative voting because it allows you to apply preference. And that is the main reason why I like it, especially over approval. And it works great for field races where instant runoff, aka ranked choice, kind of falls on its face on a field race where there's multiple winners. And I do believe that I agree. Big boards running things day to day are extraordinarily painful. So I think those are 2 areas where Dr. Moulton and I absolutely agree. So I just want to put that out there that this is not a antagonistic fight. It's a philosophical disagreement. But there's a lot of areas where Dr. Moulton and I do agree. So
yeah. So to address your I'm sorry. To address your original question, the chances of passing, I think that the proposal that I'm advocating for does have a realistic chance of passing. It was reported out by the Bylaws Committee. It's in the Bylaws report. It was unanimously supported by the Bylaws Committee. It has the support of several movers and shakers in the party. The national chair, for example, is a fan. The national chair may even end up handing the gavel to someone else so that she can speak for this proposal. There's a high threshold to approve new bylaws, and it's always a high hurdle to overcome. And obviously there's a status quo bias where people may be reluctant to change things. But I think it's an idea that has support. And if it doesn't pass this convention, then I think that momentum can be built for a future convention. Get into some of the things that Mr. Moulton said. I think he and I agree on a lot of the problems in the current system. Where we disagree is the best way to get to a solution on these matters. When the Bylaws Committee passed out the proposal that I'm advocating for, I said it was the best proposal we've ever put forth, just because it combines 2 things independently that I like. I've advocated for cumulative voting for a long time. The cumulative voting component that we passed was actually taken from a former proposal that I put forth in, I think, 2010 on the Bylaws Committee. So I've been advocating for this for years. I've been advocating for getting rid of regionals since I was a regional, or not a regional, but a regional alternate for Region 5, the Mid-Atlantic region. Just fundamentally, I think it's better to have all at large. And the main argument that I put forth to this is that regionals are designed to support a certain constituency, that constituency being state affiliates or geographical, basically a geographical alliance. And not everyone is interested in geography. Not everyone puts that as their vote moving issue, what they care most about. There's many people who vote based on other types of ideas. So someone may care most about ballot access, which there may be very different ballot access laws from states that are far apart from each other. So there may not be a reason for a particular regional representative to support or oppose strong ballot access because they may have a cornucopia of different states under their umbrella. They may care most about someone's credentials. They may care most about someone's ideology. Are they on the more moderate end, or are they on the more radical end? Do they care more about elections or communication? There are a lot of different reasons to vote for LNC members, and I don't think that we could necessarily assume that geography, where they happen to live, should be an overriding reason. The way the system is set up now, and part of the way that it'd be set up in Mr. Moulton's proposal is just based on kind of what state you live in, and that can be somewhat limited. Even still, under the proposal to go all at large, if someone cares about geography, so California, for example, they could choose to put all their votes to the California guy to get a California representative on if they banded together and decided that's something they care about. It's just they don't necessarily have to be forced to care about that thing.
Fair enough. I like that. I like that you guys, like Ken said, this is respectful and not antagonistic, which is great. I have to echo what you guys are saying about that. Like, if all that happens from this in DC is that we switch from approval to cumulative, I'll be happy. That seems like across the board just a better system for especially the at-larges.
David, if I can ask, I want to ask a question to Dr. Moulton. If it's a follow-up to what he had said.
Go ahead.
And real quick, I'll note that I have promoted this as 2 adults walk into a room, have a discussion where they disagree, and walk away still friends and adults. Then that's, wow, weird.
We could do that in the LP. Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure Chuck and I'll pull it off. Maybe we'll start a trend. As written, will it be possible to divide the cumulative voting out of the other proposal? Because I actually think cumulative absolutely can pass. I think cumulative
it is possible to divide, and we considered reporting out cumulative separate, but decided to bundle them together. And delegates may choose to nix the at-large change or the regional change and only do the cumulative. I think they're both important. So I hope we pass both. I mean, if cumulative passes, but eliminating the regionals doesn't, it still would improve the party, just not nearly as significantly as if we could shrink the board. And one other thing I'll mention is on cumulative, because people might not be as familiar with voting methods, my ideal voting method would be single transferable voting, which I know Ken is very familiar with single transferable voting. Single transferable voting is the most proportional way of doing things. It's very hard to implement without an electronic voting system. So its time has not come. But later on, if the LP switches to an electronic voting system, then it may be more realistic to implement single transferable voting, which would be even more proportional. But cumulative voting is about as good as you can get without getting super complicated.
Yeah.
So that's why I've been advocating it for a while. And in fact, back in 2010, when I introduced cumulative, I also introduced single transferable at the same time, and neither passed.
So I have to say, I am a big fan of switching to digital version of this. I'm good friends with TJ Ferreira, who made Porcupine, which we use here in New York for all of our stuff, and it has been just a massive improvement in the functionality of our state board here, which I'm not on anymore, but was for about 2.5 years, and it made everything about life easier for that kind of stuff.
So the reason I asked about the severability is that I know that there's also, from the underground belly, I'm seeing more and more chatter about basically doing the inverse of what you're suggesting, Chuck, which would be to keep the officers, nix the at-larges, keep the regions. And that seems to be what I'm hearing and seeing more of, just generally. The idea being that if you keep the regionals, that even when there's only 8 and not 9, that still means that 2/3 of the board is the regionals. So if at the end of the day, the regionals, if they're set up to be responsive to their respective state parties, which I've heard various things on, Region 3 has been officially for 6 years at least now, required in our region agreement that the regional rep will do what the state chairs tell them to do. It would keep the state parties connected and actually in control of the national party, and that's what in a large part of what I'm pushing for. I don't know that the regional representation always works out. People point out that the region reps don't always talk to the states, or they'll only talk to the big states and not the little states. But that was the reason I asked, is that seems to be another proposal that's out there talking about basically, like I said, doing the inverse, getting rid of the at-larges and going to 8 or 9 regions, and then the officers, which would drop the number down to 12 or 13 on the board.
So there's been people on both sides of this for decades. There's been people who favor the regionals and people who favor the at-large. The main reason I favor the at-large is because I don't think that necessarily that geography is people's main constituency, but it's more than that. When we look at what regionals has done over the years, regions have been radically different. So some regions are very responsive to their states, others not so much. And there's the problem of regions that are made up by a combination of big states and small states, and often the big states kind of run the show. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. There's a weird election mechanism for most regionals whereby delegates are the ones who determine who the initial regionals are, but then the regionals can be fired at any time by a majority of the state chairs, which you may think of as a feature, but I think of as a bug. And that gets into, so first of all, do the delegates really have any power if they can be immediately overruled the next day by a majority of the state chairs? Are they really voting for anyone? I mean, essentially, regionals don't represent people; they represent the state chairs. What I've seen is there are some regionals who every little issue they go and take a poll of state chairs, and what you essentially have is like a direct democracy, like one level removed. I don't think that that's how you make the best decisions. I think it's good to go and gather feedback, but I don't think you should necessarily go see the way the wind is blowing and vote that way. But I think there's a lot of regionals who do that, and sometimes not when they think it'd be best for the party, but because they don't want to get their heads on the chopping block. Mm-hmm. So there's a fundamental debate of, do you want a politician or do you want a statesman? And a politician is someone who votes for what he thinks is most popular. A statesman is someone who votes for what he thinks is best. And I think a better model is that people go and they elect someone that they trust to make good decisions. And in general, I think that when you elect someone, you should give them latitude to make those decisions over the period of time of the office, unless there's some gross negligence involved. So I don't like the idea that someone can just be recalled on a whim for not towing the line. And if someone ends up doing poorly, don't reelect the next time. So, there's accountability as elections come forth. That's the model that I prefer. But your mileage may vary. If you're looking not for statesmen, but looking for more politicians, if you're looking not for someone not for the model where we elect someone who we think is going to make the best decisions, but we want to find some framework that tries to implement some form of direct democracy, then you're not going to like my system, because my system is more the statesman model.
Yeah, I think you make a good point when you say that geography is not the major constituency. I think that's a really solid point. There's some people in the chat that are disagreeing with you, but I honestly think that that's a really solid point, because no disrespect to my current or any of my former region reps, but there's only one person that I can think of in the almost decade that I've been in the party where my region rep was my favorite region rep on the LNC. That's currently not the case. Even though I love my region rep, he's not my favorite. There's some at-larges and some other region reps that I think are cooler people and would probably be more likely to vote for over him because of what you're talking about of like actual just ideological differences or priority differences, as opposed to just, well, he's from the Northeast, so he's my guy. I don't know. I think that was a really good point. And also to your point of that there's been people on both sides of this. As soon as this came up, we got right after another comment, nixing at large would be terrible. And I think Ken makes more sense with keeping the region reps, like one comment right after the other. So we've even got people in the chat already on both sides of this. So it should be interesting.
I would like to refute one thing or point one thing out is that the way we do elections today, right? We've got 1,050 or so people in a hall that vote for the officers and the at-larges. The reality is, right, that 10,000 or that 1,050 people don't really know the history and can't know the history reasonably of a lot of those people, right? I mean, I remember my first convention in 2006. I had no clue who anybody was. I had no idea, right? So what did I do? I just was like, hey, Nick, the guy who was from Kentucky with me there, we were only 2 delegates from Kentucky, even though those were the days when delegations had lots of empty seats available. Hey, Nick, what do I do? Like, I don't know these people. He's like, well, vote for this person. I don't know in this race. Vote for this person. And it's just following the leader on a lot of stuff. And so I think by contrast, when you go down to the region level, you have a much better chance of knowing of someone, because now instead of being somebody that lives in, I'm in Kentucky, and I'm going to intentionally say Nevada wrong because it makes the Nevada people mad. Somebody in Nevada says, hey, I'm running for an office of whatever, right? Sorry, that's the way we pronounce it here in the Midwest. Get over it. I don't know who these people are. I've never interacted with them. Right. I mean, all I hear is, oh, yeah, and this is no disrespect at all meant. But when Kim Ruff ran for president, everybody's like, oh, Kim's great. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't even know who she is. I've never heard of this woman because I'm in the East. She's in the West. Right. Whereas I knew who all the players were like in Ohio, right next door to me. I knew who Dr. Feldman was when he decided to pop up and run. I knew. You know the people in your region better than you know people nationally, at least initially, for sure. Now, long term, sure, as you're in the party longer, you start meeting people. I've got lots of friends out in the West in the party, but that's only because I've been active as long as I have, right? And looking at it from a newbie perspective, I mean, half the time those folks barely know all the people in their state party, much less anybody in a different geographical location. So they're going to make a better decision, right, when they're making that election, because it's either electing everybody at large, right, 1,050 people voting for, in this case, 9 people, or the alternative would be, and that's why I like my system, I know who's in my state, right? I know who I'm electing as my state chair, or I know who those people are, or at least I should know who those people are, as compared to even in my region, right? Which I'm willing to accept the regional thing because, it's smaller. But that's why I think that the democracy issue actually gets amplified in a system where it's all at large. Now it becomes 100% about popularity and who's got some reputation that is able to reach from coast to coast, or at least some spin of a reputation from coast to coast, and not necessarily what they've actually done. And that's, and again, there are certain people, Dr. Moulton, is well known in the party because he's done a lot for the party, right? And that's great. But, and again, no disrespect to anyone currently on the LNC, heck, even people in the previous LNCs, I didn't know who some of these people were. Like before they were on the board, I'm like, who is this? I don't know who this person is. And I only believe that that's going to get worse if we elect everyone at large, because even the at-larges, I was like, I don't know who these people are. So that's my concern. That's why I prefer to get the elections more local, because you have a better chance of knowing who that is. And if you took my system and applied it to U.S. politics, right? This is kind of my point on all this. If you only had to know who the people in your county were, and then you elected your county mayor or whatever you call your particular guy, right? Or gal. And then that person was in charge with all the other people that were in charge of their counties of electing the governor, right? And were able to recall the governor at any time because, whatever. And you did it in a way that it wasn't necessarily proportional, because that's the main thing people complain about. Oh, this is not proportional. That's true. It's not. But imagine if, for instance, in a state like Texas, we'll just go there for a minute. During the COVID lockdowns, do you think the governor of Texas would have allowed the lockdowns to occur or stay as long as they did? Yeah, okay, Austin, Dallas, Houston, they wanted the lockdowns, right? The more liberal-ish cities in Texas. But the rest, the other 248, 247, whatever it is, counties in Texas, were not going for that, right? And so if you got enough balance between small and large, you get the balance there, you end up with a system that doesn't allow for a majority to overwhelm and run over the minority, with the accountability of being able to pull people. So that's where that all comes from. Anyway, I'm rambling now and I'm going to take up too much time. So I'm going to stop.
I feel like that.
I'd like to push back on some of those points if I can. So first of all, when Ken mentioned that his first convention didn't know anyone, asked a friend for advice, that's exactly what should happen. Like, if you go to a convention and you don't know someone, it's good to get some advice from people who know better. One of the things that frustrated me most about the last convention, which unfortunately I had to sit out a lot of it because I got COVID the first day, but they moved the timing of the elections to be near the beginning of the convention instead of near the end of the convention, which it was supposed to be. The whole point of having elections later was you were supposed to have an opportunity to get to know the candidates. And I've been in many national conventions, as has Ken, and people who run for these positions, they're running all around. They're giving out literature, they're shaking your hand, introducing themselves, talking themselves up. There are opportunities to get to know people. And in the modern era, people campaign long in advance of the convention themselves. And they do this through social media, things like Facebook, discussion groups, even podcasts like this. People in the comment section maybe, say, hey, I'm running for office. I appreciate your vote. People will get their website out there. Delegate lists are available so that people can contact delegates through mailers. And people visit state conventions. So people do campaign. And I think campaigning is a good way to get to know people. Another thing I want to push back on is Ken said that at a local level, if you're voting within your state, then you have a better opportunity to know people. That may be true that you have a better opportunity to know the person you're electing, but in his proposal, there's another level of removal because you may get to know the person who you're electing to the national committee, but then they elect the executive committee, which is where a lot of the decisions are made. So it's a level of removal where you're voting for an indirect representative who then votes for the real power within the decision making. And additionally, at least when you go to the national convention, delegates are proportional to population, whereas the level of removal that he has, somewhat proportional. The level of removal he has is if you're a Californian, then California gets one vote, and Delaware gets one vote, and DC gets one vote in deciding who gets to the executive committee, which I don't consider a feature, I consider a bug. That's why when we designed the House of Representatives versus the Senate, and when we designed the Electoral College, we had an element of it that was proportional. So I think that that's a benefit of the existing system and a benefit of the system where at large is elected by national convention delegates instead of having one per state that then select the executive committee. Another problem is, even though you may know people within your state better, you have less options of well-qualified people because talent is not necessarily equally distributed in the party. We've had times in the party where there were 4 LNC members from Texas, or there were 3 LNC members from Virginia, or there were 4 from California. So sometimes there are certain areas of the country that may have more talent, and we can define talent in a number of ways. It can be just institutional memory within the party. It can be specialized expertise, like we have, CPAs or lawyers or IT people. It can be people who have are happen to be well respected ideologically, so know a lot about the party philosophy, and that talent is not necessarily equally distributed. So if you live in, say, Idaho or in Arkansas, then you might Ken is saying that you would benefit because you know the people better, but you may have less choices than if you're able to choose from the whole nation of who you want to support.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Your second point there actually directly addresses what I was going to bring up as kind of a contention with your first point. I'm personally, as a New York delegate, which is it's not the biggest, but it's one of the bigger ones. I personally think that that's kind of BS. I don't think that we should have a larger say in things than a lot of the other states that are objectively better at this than we are. We have no elected libertarians. We get routinely some of the lowest vote totals in statewide elections, or whether you want vote totals or percentage, however you're comparing it. We routinely get our asses kicked by states like Oklahoma or Massachusetts or New Hampshire. And so I don't know if this is probably not the place to go on this little tangent, but I've always thought that some sort of a switch up where it's more about actual success than it is just pure population or membership number would be an improvement, where the states that are kicking ass get that larger say in things. You kind of did address that in the second half of what you were saying, where given your system, I can make sure that no one on the LNC is from New York, because clearly we don't have anyone who belongs on the LNC. And I mean, at the moment we don't have one. Neither the region rep nor the alternate is from New York. The last New York person on there was Tucker. But yeah, I think that just pure population or even membership isn't the best way to determine which state should have the most say in things.
And if I could jump in on that, the problem with success-based metrics, right, is that different states have different ballot access laws. And in being in New York, you're keenly aware of that. The law that they have passed in New York is an abomination. The law that they have recently passed in Arizona is an abomination. These in Kentucky is not great, right? We don't have a party petition. Every single person has to petition as an independent. We just get our label, which sounds okay until you realize that running just for the executive branch at the state level requires, 35,000? Yeah, 30,000 valid signatures in a state with 4.4 million people. Right. So that's a lot of signatures in a state with a population of 4.4 mil. Whereas in Ohio, with 56,000 valid signatures and a population of 10,000, that gives the whole party ballot access for 4 years. Right. So the different states have different rules. And so I understand what you're saying. Logically, if the rules were the same across the board, success-based metrics would absolutely make sense. Unfortunately, the rules are ridiculous, in several states. Tennessee also has the same problem where they have to get, 56,000 valid signatures in a state population of about 10 million to get ballot access that should last for 4 years if they did it. But you're talking about having to collect somewhere in the neighborhood of about 80,000 raw signatures. And then today's dollars, that comes out to roughly $400,000 just to get the party label on the ballot for 4 years. That's a lot of money and a lot of effort And by contrast, right, Indiana got their access in 1994 through the Secretary of State's race. They've been able to maintain that. And so I mean, listen, they're maintaining it, which is good. But it's a lot easier for them to keep building on that momentum once they had it, and were able to retain it. They've been able to build that momentum, and they're doing great things over in Indiana.
True that.
Real quick, I wanted to note the indirect elections is, in my opinion, a feature, not a bug. That is supposed to be that way, because if you know your chair or whoever your state person is on that bigger board, you can yell at them about why is, such and such. They almost become I cannot say the word ombudsman for the national party. And it also makes sure that the states feel connected to the LNC, because they are the LNC, right? The state parties make up the LNC at that point. And it also inherently decentralizes the LNC, which is something that we all talk about, decentralization and how, centralization of power is bad. If my plan were implemented, we would be extremely decentralized in that all the conventions happen at different times. The terms of office could all be different depending on what different states codify in their rules. You're going to have a dispersion of the elections all over the place. So you're never going to have a full wipeout of the board. You're never going to have that loss of institutional knowledge. You're going to have the ability to provide stability through that decentralization, which speaks directly to our principles, that we would be better off decentralized. I do understand what Dr. Moulton says about well-qualified people, but I also do believe that there is somebody either well-qualified or ready to become well-qualified all over the country, right? We all started as just volunteers and activists, and then we got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into this, and learned, right? I mean, when I first got in, I was a lot like any new member comes in, they're angry. They're like, what's wrong with these people? I mean, liberty is awesome. They must not be able to sell water to a guy who's been in the desert for 3 months or 3 days, whatever, right? They can't say, these guys are terrible. And then you get in, you're like, oh, that's what's going on. Okay. And then you get deeper and you're like, oh, yeah, ballot access. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, the media ignores your existence. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, great. So, that's the kind of stuff that you learn over time, and the institutional knowledge, the decentralization, I do think is important. And I worry about, at a convention, and we just saw this recently happen, right? Where a convention with a caucus comes in strong, energized, comes in and damn near wipes out the whole board. And the only thing that really survived was the regions, right? Because those are still chosen by the states. So, that's, in my opinion, another benefit of having a system that at least retains the regionals, if not, keep putting the states in charge of at least the high level decisions. Again, they're not doing day-to-day work. That would be a disaster. But the high level control is decentralized through the 51 affiliates.
So some pushback on some of those points. First of all, the proposal put forth by the Bylaws Committee is relatively modest. We are eliminating regionals, changing the approval vote into cumulative, not much else. There are additional ways that I feel could improve the system, but we didn't want to make this too complicated. So Ken has articulated some problems in the current system that I think need solving as well. And I agree with him. I think the fact that there can be total board turnover is a bad thing. I would prefer to have staggered board terms. So in a perfect world, I think that we should have at-large elections that are 4-year terms that stagger, so that you don't have the possibility of a whole new board coming in. But that's not part of the proposal, because the proposal is relatively modest. We're just changing little things. We're not trying to solve every problem with this proposal. So Ken also pointed out that he thinks every state can find someone with some level of talent who can be molded into that. I'm going to share a little bit about how I joined the party. And I know Ken has a similar story, many of you do. When I first joined the party, so first of all, I found out about the Libertarian Party because I followed C-SPAN, I followed politics, and I saw Harry Brown on C-SPAN. That got me excited about the party. I signed up as a member. I learned more about the party, but I didn't get involved locally until after college when I was about to turn 25 years old, and I thought it'd be fun to run for Congress. So I was maybe 24, 23 at the time, and I was under the impression if you want to run for political office, you want to get the nomination, you have to build up a record. People have to know you're not gonna take anyone who walks off the street. It turns out they will take anyone who walks off the street. So I came to my first meeting. They said, "Hi, introduce yourself. What are you here for?" I said, "Well, I'd be interested in running for Congress." They said, "Great, you're it." And I was like, "What?" I thought I had to get involved for a while. And then my very first meeting, they said, "We have our county has a vacancy on the state committee." Then they turned to me and they're like, "Do you want to do it?" And this is my first meeting. What are you talking about? But I became the representative to the state committee, my first county meeting. And then my first national convention, we elected Jim Lark as our regional representative. They said, "Who wants to be regional alternate?" Everyone looked around. And as I was looking around, everyone else stepped back. And that happens quite often, regional elections, is you are it because everyone else steps back, which I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration. Like I was interested in the position and I attended all the meetings. I got more involved with the party as a result. But there are some regions where elections are very competitive. There are a lot of candidates out there. There are other regions that are not that competitive. And I know that's changed over time as the party has grown. But there's still disparity between the different regions. And I think we would like to have a situation where every election we have a paradise of riches, where we have a lot of choices. And I just don't think that's the case. I do think it's important that people have an opportunity to grow within the party and find positions that are suited for them. And if they're interested, have an opportunity to serve in these higher positions. But the way that happens most other places, so if you're running for political office, for example, generally you don't step off the street and run for president or run for Congress or something like that. Generally, you build up a resume of prior positions of escalating responsibility. So if you want to run for Congress, generally you've been a state legislator first. If you want to run for state legislature, generally you've been maybe on city council or mayor or a school board or something like that. Most people build up a resume in advance, and you can do the same thing in the Libertarian Party. So even if we get rid of regionals and we get rid of regional alternates, you might say, well, how can someone become an at-large because no one's going to know them? Well, we have opportunities to serve on LNC subcommittees. We have opportunities to serve on the bylaws committee, the platform committee, the credentials committee. We have opportunities to make a name for yourself by starting a podcast, by
don't do that, guys.
By running for office, and maybe winning office, by serving on your state committee, serving as state chair. And you might end up running a panel at the national convention. Like, here is some best practices that I've learned when I was a candidate, or when I ran a podcast or whatever. So you teach people. So you can get your name out there. You can charge.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I'm going to take a couple of questions out of the chat here. First one, Meredith, yes, you are my favorite region rep. There was a more serious one up here. Where'd it go? Oh, to Ken, what stops the large body from just challenging everything and making it a shit show?
Number one, they can hire.
Ooh, you're really quiet now.
Hold on. Is that any better?
A little bit.
All right, hang on. Sorry, I play with my audio settings. You asked me to do it.
I know. I was trying to make it better, and now it's worse.
Yeah, I don't. That's really weird.
There we
It should
go.
be doing it better.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So the question was, I'm sorry. Now ADD is real. What was the question?
What stops the 51 person committee from just
Yes.
interfering in everything?
I mean, what stops the big board from acting like a bunch of ding dongs is that they are the board, right? They have the ability to remove the small board if the small board is doing what they don't want them to, right? That's the whole point. So, I mean, unless it is the intent of over half the state parties to intentionally crash the organization and make it not function, which I would hope is not the case, the majority of the board would fix the problem, whatever that problem is, right? If they don't like what the smaller board's doing, yeah, they can undo it immediately, but there should also be a conversation about, hey, this is what we actually expect, right? And if it's repeatedly not followed, you fire the small board. Like there's no trials, they're employees, right? So hired and fired at will, no trials, none of that. They're just bye. And that's how you get rid of a board that doesn't listen to the larger organization that put them there. And I think that's actually one of the main strengths here is that the large board, if they're not doing right what their states want them to do, it's up to the states to put mechanisms in on how they recall that person. But it's up, the state parties can recall their person if they don't like what their person's doing on the larger board. So however they codify that, that's up to them. I do not want to get involved in state bylaws at all. I can make suggestions, but at the end of the day, never would want to push that down as a rule from above onto the state parties. So, but that is essentially how it would work, right? The checks and balances are the state members keep a check on their state person on the big board. The big board, their group keeps a check on the small board. The small board ideally stays focused on doing the business, and they're going to keep their employees in line because, again, it's their next on the chopping block from the big board if the other employees that are under them aren't doing the job that they're asked to do.
Fair enough. Yeah. So
checks and balances.
unless you have 27 state reps that are all wannabe fucky, it just becomes a moot point because it would be useless for 3 or 4 people to even try to do much because they would just get voted down quickly.
Well, sure. I mean, listen, if we get to the point where half the party wants to crash it, I mean, what the hell? I mean, it's game over anyway. I mean, let's just be real. If over half the party wants to destroy the party, it's going to die.
I'd like to push back a bit on this smaller board concept that Ken has in his proposal, because I've mostly talked about my proposal rather than his proposal. So I already mentioned one of my issues with it is this indirect election, which I think that level of removal is a bug. He thinks it's a feature, but there's other problems with the smaller board as well. First of all, he keeps calling it an executive committee or a smaller board, but it's not really that. It's staff. So he's hiring staff. These are employees that are then paid employees, and having it have some characteristics of a board, it's just weird. So there's a few ways that it's weird. So number one, normally the way boards work is it's one person, one vote. So a bunch of people collectively to get together and they vote on various issues. That's not the way that most organizations with employees are run. Most organizations with employees are run hierarchically. So you have like a CEO who has managers under him, and then these managers have employees under them. And so the managers, make some decisions, but the CEO can always say, don't do that. Here's how it's going to go. If you have this board, like the chair, the vice chair, the treasurer, the secretary, I guess he calls it the CEO, the chief operating officer, the chief knowledge officer, the chief financial officer. It's one person, one vote. So you can have the lower level employees ganging up on the CEO and overruling the CEO. That's not the way most hierarchical organizations are run is just kind of weird. The other issue with that is like I understand what he's trying to. Let me back up. I understand what he's trying to accomplish, and it's a real problem in that in our current structure, very often our employees are micromanaged, and they're micromanaged not just by one boss, but from 27 bosses on a very schizophrenic board. So we would prefer to have and I know Ken is familiar with Carver governance, but the idea that a board should be set in broad policies and goals, and then employees ought to be implementing those goals. That would be an ideal sort of scenario. And then when they don't implement those successfully, then you revisit them, and maybe you need to change the goals, maybe you need to change the employees. So I understand that's kind of what he's trying to achieve, and I respect that. That's something I agree with, but I don't think his proposal does that. So first of all, his proposal assumes that we can actually hire employees, and for several decades we've been in a position to do that. That's not necessarily always the case, and in fact, party finances are imploding right now. I don't think we can even afford to have 4 high-level employees of the type that he mentions right now. We are operating, I believe, without an executive director, and we don't really have the financial means to hire some of these employees right now. There's of course the argument that sometimes even if you don't have the money, maybe you can't afford not to hire a certain person because they would raise more money to more than pay for their position. But we might not always be in a financial position to pay for all of these employees that are now mandated by the bylaws, in his proposal at least. In our existing bylaws, we're not mandated to have any employees. So the number of people we hire can grow and shrink based upon party finances, and it has shrunk considerably as our fundraising has dried up. So I would not tie the hands of the parties that we have to hire certain employees when we can't necessarily afford them. So I think that it's admirable to want to have employees, admirable to have these certain roles that you want to fill. I don't, and he's trying to hard code that into the bylaws, and I understand the reason for wanting to do that, because if it's not in the bylaws, maybe they're not going to do it. But my concern is sometimes we can't afford these employees, and even if we do have these employees, I don't think a board structure where it's one person, one vote is the right way to oversee employees like this. I think in general, in most employee structures, it's better to be hierarchical, where you have someone at the top of the reporting structure, you have people below them who report to that person, people below them who report to those people, etc. It just works out better for most businesses and most political organizations that I know of.
So if I could respond to that, yes, it is a board versus employees, but I think the main thing missing there is that there are publicly traded companies that do have boards that are elected, that there are times when CEOs leave companies because the rest of the board won't go along with their plans. I mean, we've certainly seen that in the private sector, and so it's not as foreign as it may seem. Obviously, we don't do that here, but it is done in the public sector, or excuse me, the private sector. Out in the real world, that form of governance does exist, and yes, it envisions everyone being an employee and being compensated for their time. I think the role that we create for chair today is insane. If you're doing it right, you're spending 40 to 60 hours a week. You're supposed to do it unpaid, and I have concerns that creates bad incentives, that the people that are willing to take that job either are woefully underqualified and have no idea what they're getting in for, or have a screw loose and have something to prove to somebody. And so that's who works for 60 hours a week for free for 2 years? That's insane. You can't do it. I mean, to be fair, I did it for many years, 40 hours a week, but it's insane all the same, right? I would never expect anyone to do that.
We both have a screw loose, that's for sure.
I don't think I don't think that's necessarily has to be the case. It has been the case several of our previous chairs. I agree with you to that extent, but I think a good chair, number one, ought to delegate. There's two ways to delegate. You can delegate to LNC committees and other volunteers, or you can delegate to staff. And what we talked about the way using Harvard governance, that I mean, ideally you would have staff doing a lot of the work, and the chair would be setting broad goals and saying, go to town. But on the fundraising side, the chair in the past few years has done a lot of fundraising. There are some big donors who would prefer to talk to the head honcho. I certainly understand that. But I don't think that talking to those super high fundraisers is a 60-hour-a-week thing. I think that a lot of the fundraising can be delegated to lower levels than just the chair. I agree with you. If someone's going to write like a check over $100,000, which is possible if it goes not just to the general fund, but to like the building fund, invention fund, things like that, then talk to the chair. But if it's for something like 5,000 and less, the chair doesn't need to deal with that on a day-to-day basis.
And I would agree with that. And just to finish the point on the hourly or the getting paid, right? It can be hourly instead of salary. And you could still technically have volunteers. The amount that these people would be paid, if anything, would be set by the big board, right? They're the ones that decide, hey, we're going to hire Bob Smith and we're going to pay him something or not to do it, right? So they have that ability, and there is the ability to scale down if we lose revenue to the point where we can't afford to have those people. Now, I would suggest that we've always had at least 3 or 4 employees in the office through time, right? I mean, we've always had a bare minimum staff. In those times, right, that would still fall back to those 4 officers, right? Because we've always had operations, we've always had an executive director, which is what I kind of see the combined, and right now that's already happened, the chair and seat and executive director. What's that? Chuck's shaking his head and laughing. What am I missing, Chuck?
We have had periods of time with no executive director. We have always had operations. I think you're right about that.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, but there's always been a handful of people in the office no matter what, right? And that's kind of my point, is that no matter what, there's always been some staff. And yes, there's been times we've unfortunately had to scale back. So it's that. The one thing I do want to get to before we wrap this up for sure, because the negatives, I admit I've got negatives on my side, and no system's perfect. But my concern about the proposal on the other side is that if you remove the region reps, the states no longer have any say whatsoever in the national organization. Their members do once a year at national convention, but that's not necessarily based on the needs of the state party. It's not necessarily based on what leadership in the state party is looking for support to help build their organizations in their states. So if those leaders have the power to do so, and some do, what would keep them in the party? If they're completely disconnected from national, in the past, there's been that attitude that the states are like, screw national, they don't do anything for me. National at times has completely ignored the state party, saying they're a different organization. They need to run themselves. And they use that as an excuse to ignore them completely. What keeps the state parties from just saying, you know what, screw it, we're out, peace?
I don't think anything. I don't think any institutional barrier prevents that. I think you're right that the states would have no direct representation to national, but realistically, LNC members, not just the regionals, but also the at-large and the officers, they listen to state chairs. The state chairs are usually some of the first people they consult, because they know the state chairs are on the ground and know what's happening. So particularly ballot access, as you well know, when there's ballot access problem in a particular state, who do they call first? They call the state chair, say, what's going on? So I don't think that the LNC is going to completely ignore the state chairs. I don't think the LNC is going to completely ignore the states. Certainly the LNC has in the past made some bad decisions that infuriate the states. And I'm with Ken on the CRM issue, for example, which I think is a real shame. I don't think the LNC is listening very much to the states on that one. But I don't think that the solution to that is necessarily a direct vote-in constituency to the states, because of the other problems that we've seen with the complicatedness of the structure that he sets up in his proposal. I think that no system is perfect, and certainly you've articulated, some disadvantages with getting rid of regionals, but I think it's overall a step in the right direction. Because even though it has some weaknesses in that there may be less direct accountability to the states, I think the strengths outweigh those weaknesses in shrinking the size of the board and giving more choices to the population and membership as a whole through National Convention delegates to select the candidates of their choice.
So this is something that's kind of been in the chat a little bit here and there, and is directly related to what you're saying, Dr. Moulton. So I'll kind of just reframe the question a little bit. Is there any way to address an issue in those 2 years? If one of those at-large reps is an awful person, is there something other than just waiting until the next convention to get that person out of office?
There is. I mean, there is. By the way, this is one of the reasons that this proposal was being put forth, that the fiduciary responsibilities of regionals, they're serving two masters. So they're serving both the states and also supposedly the LNC as a whole. But when they breach their fiduciary duty to the LNC as a whole, there is no way for the LNC to remove a regional. A regional can only be removed under our current system by state chairs in those regions. And that's a problem, because there can be a situation when a regional representative does something that is a huge violation of their fiduciary duty, but their state chairs are just fine with that particular representative, and there's no removal mechanism. There is a removal mechanism for at-larges and for officers, where they can be removed by a supermajority of the LNC for cause. And that's another proposal that the Bylaws Committee is considering right now, is to tighten up what we mean by for cause. I served on the Judicial Committee when Karen Ann Harlos was removed from the LNC. I wrote the majority opinion, and it was really painful for me to write that opinion, because she's a friend of mine. And interpreting bylaws is in a certain way is not necessarily the way I would have voted if I was voting on the LNC. When I say not, it is not the way I would have voted if I was on the LNC. But there is a removal mechanism now, and the Bylaws Committee is looking to clarify that removal mechanism to make it even clearer. I do not. So again, there's a question of, is this a feature or a bug? I do not think that it's a good idea to have a way to recall someone from the LNC in the middle of a term for no reason at all. In my opinion, through the political process, someone should, if you don't like what someone's doing, they should either serve out their term and you don't reelect them, or you remove them for cause, which is something like gross negligence, like if the treasurer is stealing money, if the secretary is ignoring the bylaws, things like that are reasons to remove someone, not because you don't like the way that they voted on a particular issue. And reasonable people can disagree. Like, some people may think that they should be able to be removed at any time by some majority voted membership. That's not the way that I conceive of that structure, because I think that we're electing statesmen and not politicians. I give them some rope to do a good job or a bad job, and revisit that as every convention comes up. Another thing I want to push back on, by the way, is a little bit out of left field, but one of the points of Ken's proposal is that it frees up convention time, which I think is a benefit of Ken's proposal, because you don't need to elect at-larges in the convention, because the regionals are elected outside of that, which frees up convention time to do other things. That's a benefit of what Ken's saying. Ken goes even further, saying that there's no point in even having off-year conventions or midterm conventions. That we could just have conventions every 4 years for presidential elections. In my opinion, I think that midterm conventions are a good thing. So what I have found from attending many national conventions is, even though it takes an enormous amount of money and time for people to attend those national conventions, even the national conventions where we don't elect presidential candidates, I find that I leave every national convention energized, wanting to do more for libertarianism. And I leave every national convention with more knowledge and know-how, not necessarily from like seminars or speakers, but from talking to libertarians. And I get to talk from a libertarian to a libertarian who lives across the country. And I say, how did you do this? And I learned some stuff that I can go back and apply to my state party. So I don't think that getting rid of midterm conventions would be a good thing. I think that would be a step backwards.
If anything, I would do it the other way around, because I think that the fact that we elect a chair and pick a presidential candidate at the same time is just a ridiculous thing that we do, that we have to overhaul the LNC and then be like, go do a thing. While they're still getting their feet under them as a brand new board, they're supposed to be running a successful presidential campaign, is, I think, a ludicrous expectation of people that we've had for far too long. But yeah, I completely agree with you. And I've never been to a national convention, but I've been to almost a dozen different state conventions. And actually, just for the first time this year, went to my own state convention. But I used to call it like a youth retreat high, where, you come back just gung-ho, like full-blown, like all the way Christian, like ready to just like evangelize and do crazy things. I think getting together with other libertarians is a huge benefit. And the more that we can do that, the better. 100%.
If I can respond to that, I did posit that it would be possible to go to conventions every 4 years. That's not necessarily something I support. I see the pros and cons of each of those. I do think that if you went to a system that retained every 2 years, that perhaps you only do presidential nomination in the presidential year, and you do bylaws and platform in the non-presidential normally, and then if there's some emergency or something, maybe a 2/3 to even hear it kind of thing in the presidential, just to keep the presidential focused on the presidential, and then keep the non-presidential business somewhere else, because you do get a different group of people that have different goals. One of the early things I learned in the LP is that there's different types of libertarians. And I learned this at the 2006 convention. It was a really good talk about the 4 types. And it's the activists, the party leaders, the candidates, and the philosophers. When you have a presidential nomination, you're going to inherently have more of the people that are focused on candidates, not necessarily, and maybe activism as well, but not necessarily on party leadership and philosophy necessarily. But party leadership for sure, because that's not what they're there to do. They're there to elect to nominate a presidential candidate. And so it's something that could be done. But that all said, I just want to make sure it's clear that I don't really care on that. I just posit that would make it possible to reasonably do that.
So just real quick, I agree with Ken on that. One thing that I want to point out is, in a perfect world, in my opinion, we should have 4-year terms for officers, and they should be elected not in the presidential year, so that it's more party faithful who would elect them, instead of people who come in just for the presidential election and aren't as active. But again, this proposal is not trying to solve every problem. This proposal is a very modest proposal.
Yeah. So, real quick, then, to respond to the other part that came before that, was the removal by the LNC and whatnot. I agree with Dr. Moulton. Right now, the LNC does serve two masters, right? They've got this board of their own, and they get elected popularly by the convention body. And so they have to be, if they want to get reelected, they have to think about, well, what do I have to do to be popular with 550 or so people that are likely to show up at the next convention. And then they also have the interest of the states through the regions, right? So they've got the two different things, especially the region reps have that, but the board itself ends up split like that. My proposal, I believe, would make it so that they serve one master, the states. I believe that the LNC should exist solely to promote and help build the state parties. I believe state parties exist solely to build and support county parties. That where we are as a party, where we are effective is at the local level, and that's at the county party level. That anything we can do to boost our county parties will see significant increases in wins electorally. If we're focused on running for winnable offices with the resources that we have today, that's at the county level or lower, city, whatever. And we have lots of great libertarians elected today at those levels. And I'm grateful for that. We have some great folks here in Kentucky elected at city councils that are pushing for liberty in their cities. I just wish we had more of them in more cities, both in Kentucky and throughout the United States. The point being that, yes, serving two masters creates a weird problem. I believe that my solution would make it a state-centric board rather than a delegate-centric board.
I'm going to push back on that just a little bit because you guys have both kind of made a similar point for both of your proposals, and I personally, this is probably going to put me in some hot water, but I don't care. I don't think that that's actually the worst thing in the world. I think that national and the state parties are two very different animals, and if the national party could just focus on national things, as just getting ballot access, getting us a presidential campaign that's working well, and maybe some infrastructure and some fundraising. And I really don't think that the national party needs to be involved in state party issues. I think that we're seeing how problematic that can be with like what's going on in Michigan right now, what happened in New Hampshire, what's happened in Arizona and Oregon and Massachusetts and so many other states throughout the history of the LP. When the LNC cares what's going on in a state party, at least from my perspective, being in here like 8 or 9 years now, has almost always turned out to be a bad thing. And if we could just get it to where these two ideas are completely removed from each other, and national can stop caring about how states are run and how states are operated and what's going on in the states and focus on their jobs at national, I think that might honestly be a benefit, not exactly a problem. As you guys have been saying, a feature, not a bug.
So I tend to agree with you. I come from Pennsylvania. So
objectively the best state in the country as far as the LP goes. Like,
objectively. Some of you may not be aware of some of the history of the party, but it used to be that we had something called the Unified Membership Program. And the Unified Membership Program took a portion of membership dues and rebated it to the appropriate state party for them to spend on state things. Pennsylvania was one of the few states that was not subscribed to the Unified Membership Program. And Pennsylvania's position was that the Unified Membership Program was kind of a form of welfare, that checks would come to the state party who hadn't necessarily done anything to deserve it. Some states might do very good things with that money. Some states might just squander that money. And it made a whole lot more sense to us that if a state has a great idea of what to do with the money, that it should fundraise for that money, and it can use its great idea to encourage that fundraising. And that fundraising doesn't necessarily need to come from within that state. So in Pennsylvania, we've made pitches to people outside Pennsylvania to get money to pay for exciting things in Pennsylvania. And essentially, you should have those pitches. But my worry is if we have a state-focused LNC, then we're going to see a lot of money siphoned out to the states. And that may not necessarily be the best way to spend that money. In my opinion, what national should do is national should focus on places where there's economies of scale, things that are unique to national. So focus of national should be things like ballot access, 50 state ballot access, promoting the presidential campaign, getting good data, which then it makes available to state affiliates and the campaigns, running a website, having someone who answers the phone, which I know phones are falling out of favor in the digital age, but you could think of someone who answers the email. That not every state is going to be active enough to have someone who can answer the phone or answer email in a super timely fashion. But if we can have someone to answer, press inquiries or inquiries from someone new trying to find out about the party, I think that's important to have. And those are those economies of scale places that should be at national. There's other things that don't really need to be national's purview. So if a state is focusing on like a state election or focusing on some advocacy issue within the state, there's no reason that national needs to handle that. The social media is another example. I think it's important that we have a Facebook presence, a Twitter presence, etc. I might not always agree with what national is saying on those mediums, depending who's in charge of those. But I think it's important that we have a presence. And so, I mean, fundamentally, I think national should focus on national things, state should focus on state things. So I think that's kind of where you were going, David. And I just want to say that I agree with that.
Oh, you're super low again, Ken.
Why does this happen?
I'm not sure. Your microphone hates you today.
It does. All right, I've got it cranked to the max. I don't know. Can you hear me any better?
You're getting there. There you go.
All right. Well, I'm pulling the microphone closer. Hello, is there anyone in there? So I guess my point is that I agree. I think that I don't want national involved in state party matters, and in my proposal, right, with other states basically making up the LNC rather than a handful of emails or a caucus or whatever being able to influence what the LNC decides to do. The state parties themselves, what state party is going to be like, hey, let's gang up on this state party, not thinking, oh, I might be the next one to get ganged up on, right? I mean, the point is that the states, my experience with the state party leadership is they mostly just want to be left alone, right? If they can get some tools from national, cool. I love the idea of having somebody answer the damn phone. That sounds great. I mean, and to be fair, I've been guilty of that myself, right? I mean, it's not easy to keep track of that phone. And at scale, how many calls does Kentucky get in a year? 10, right? Am I supposed to like dedicate my life to waiting for the phone to ring? So, you know, that is that. And then also the content on social media in my perfect world would be that the national party is retweeting or reposting or whatever you want to call whatever platform, the content from state parties, right? Some great thing that the state party's like, oh man, that's awesome. Everybody needs to see that, right? And we already see that with some state parties. For a while, LP Texas was on fire. Just amazing content coming out of LP Texas and getting, you know, people were just doing it. Other states were just doing it, right? Because it was great content. And I guess my point is that national has no incentive to help state parties unless they think it's going to get 550 or so delegates to vote for them at the next national convention, as it sits today. And under the proposal from the Bylaws Committee, it will remain that way, perhaps even more so, because now we don't have the states having a voice at all. Whereas if the entire board is focused on and built around what the state parties want, that you're going to see more of that. You would see more of the state organizations saying, hey, you know what would be cool is if somebody could answer the damn phone for us, because, you know, we get 10 calls a year, but if we have 30 state parties that they come together and say, hey, could we have somebody just answer the phone for all 30 of us with our brand, right? It comes in on a number. They see what number it comes in on. Oh, this is Kansas calling, somebody from Kansas, yeah, Libertarian Party of Kansas, how can we help you? Right? That'd be great. I think that would be a wonderful program that would cost very little money overall. It would be far more effective than trying to hire an operator, because you can buy those services certainly independently, but it would be a lot cheaper to have one of those, one person, rather than have 30 of them across the state parties. That's those economies of scale projects that save the party money, but that's not stuff the national party's ever interested in. And I think that the fact that we elect them popularly at convention, it's all about how many delegates are going to show up. Can I get 550 of them to vote for me? That's what's driving the policy decisions of those that are elected at large amongst the delegate bodies. Just my opinion.
Fair enough. Ken or Chuck, any pushback on that?
I mean, I don't think that's the only motivating factor. I think I think the concerns of the states are very often the concerns of the delegates as well, because the people who go to the national convention are often state activists, so they know about the problems in particular states. I think that the candidates ought to talk about how they can help the states, that's one of their selling points. But where I part ways from Ken is I just don't think the structure where the states are the ultimate masters is the best way of setting up the institutional structure. I think it serving the states is one argument that candidates can make, and it's a constituency that winning candidates should respond to, but it's not the only constituency. And I guess that's just where he and I disagree.
No. Yeah, man, I don't know. I'm just seeing if I can fix it on my end.
It is me. I see it now. Hang on. I see it's me. All right. That work? Nope.
All right. There was one question in here directly for you, Chuck, so I'm gonna find it while Ken is gone, and I'm gonna see if I can make you look less silly on the screen. Possibly. You're under the Ken at the moment, but good enough. Where to go? Y'all have been talking a lot in the chat, and I love you guys for that. And so I have to scroll back up to find what I was looking for. Damn, where to go? There it was. I'm not entirely sure what Derek meant by this. The weakness, this was a little bit ago when we were talking about the sizes of the board. The weakness is seeing what happens when an organization funds people to become delegates without states selecting delegates by some vote, and those delegates vote in an entire board. So yeah, I think we've seen a few times over where one big push.
I mean, I think he's talking about the Mises takeover in Reno, which love it or hate it, it happened. And just to talk briefly about that, I mean, the way our system is set up. It's been ripe for that sort of takeover for a while. The Mises Caucus just was super organized, and hats off to them. They saw the opportunity and they took it, because there if you can there are a lot of delegations that just for years and years went unfilled, and they proactively filled those delegations. There are people out there who are willing to attend the National Convention because they're enthusiastic, but are not financially able to do so. And they helped some of those people by defraying part of their expenses, so travel costs, hotel costs, etc. And that's a way to get people who agree with your viewpoint to be put in a position where they can then vote the way you want them to. And that's what the Mises Caucus did, and they were successful in taking over the party. In my opinion, so let's set aside whether that takeover was good or bad. In my opinion, it would benefit the LNC to retain more institutional memory, to stagger the board so that we don't have the entire board elected in particular years. But that's beyond the scope of the proposal I'm putting forth. So that's a problem with the current system that would still be a potential problem if you see it as a problem. If the bylaws proposal passed, I would favor staggering the board in the future, but that would be a separate proposal.
Fair enough.
I'm back now.
Hey,
I went
there we go.
lo-fi. So we're on the phone dialed in. I gave up. I don't know what's going on with the audio. We'll just go with it. So I think I caught the drift of what was being said there, and I don't know if you heard what I said last, but the point is that I do think that going to a completely staggered state thing, right, would mean that individual state interests are still there. Could a takeover occur? I mean, sure. Listen, even in my model, right, you get 26 states, you've got a majority, right? So you would, if I was looking to take over, I'd target the 26 smallest states. I'd focus all my emphasis there. I'd take over 26 states. You could still do that. The difference is that you'd have to do it over time, right? You wouldn't be able to do it all at one time because the different states would be, in theory, electing their people at different times, at different conventions. You're not able to just get a bunch of people to come to one convention. It would be staggered and decentralized. I agree with the idea of a staggered terms being ideal. I don't agree with 4-year terms, and that's the problem with national, right? Is that, I mean, imagine getting stuck with somebody who's just terrible for 4 years, and it's not that they're even a terrible person or anything, right? They're just bad at their job, but they don't do anything that breaks the rules. They're just bad. Now you're stuck with them for 4 years. There have been times where it's like, okay, well, we saw in the last term, right, what happens when you remove somebody, and for whatever reason, right? And I told people, and I'll say it publicly again, I told people not to do it. They did it anyway, whatever. And what I said would happen, happened. So just saying. The point is that removing somebody is a traumatic, and actually there's a whole thing about this, about how removing somebody from a board is a traumatic event. It certainly was. Even after Karen Ann was removed, the board was in like this weird shell shock state until convention, right? It is not a good thing to remove someone from a board by force when it requires a trial, when there's all this stuff about it, right? Whereas by contrast, when they're employees and treated as such, it's no different than hiring and firing. And yeah, it's sad when somebody gets fired for doing a bad job, but that's the real world. Like, that happens all the time. I've been fired for sucking at a job before because it was menial labor and I didn't give a shit.
Same.
Oh, I swore.
Oh, you can say whatever the fuck you want on this show.
Okay. So the point is that if you don't do a good job, you can be removed, or you can be asked to leave, right? That's the other thing too, is that it's not now it's a more of an employer-employee relationship, and it is a little bit more clear. Whereas on a board, it's like, well, I've been elected to this, and I went to all these state conventions to try to get this, and the campaigning and the electoral politics side of it all I seek to try to remove a bunch of that from it, right? I'm trying to remove the negatives of democracy out of the process so that we end up with a board that functions professionally. And that's really my goal in all of it.
Or functional and not embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like to quote other people's slogans. Regardless, the point is that, sometimes, and listen, well, we won't go there. That gets a little too personal. The point is that sometimes people don't turn out to be the best on a board. Sometimes they need to go. And sometimes that happens one of two ways, right? They're pushed out, they are asked to leave, and they do. However it occurs, treating it like an employee-employer relationship is more familiar to people. It's more normal to people. I don't know that anybody on the previous LNC had ever removed anyone from a board before, and I don't know that they fully understood what that really meant. And so my point is that I think we avoid a lot of those problems by having it state-driven. That's all.
All right, fake super chat.
That's what I'm
from
trying to get at.
Nathan Madden. Which of these proposals brings the LP more in line with the successful two parties?
I will tell you that was something I took a note on a long time ago. I never got to. Thanks, Nathan. The Republicans have a board of either 100 or 150. I forget which. I could never get clarity, and I never cared enough to read their bylaws. They either get 2 people from each state or 3 people from each state. I don't care, something like that. The Democrats have like thousands of people on their board because it's like the state chairs, the state vice chairs, the whatever chair, this chair, everybody who's elected above this level, anybody who's given this amount of money. Like, it's a ridiculous thing. That's that whole superdelegates thing, if anybody's old enough to remember that, like I am.
Yeah, fuck the way the DNC
Greens
worked that way.
Yeah,
with them enough.
So the Greens, if I read their bylaws correct when I proposed this the last term, I believe they actually have 3 members per board from each state, or 3 members from each state on their board as well. So they would be about 150, or if they count all the districts, then that 57, so that'd be 171. But roughly that as well. The Greens, though, they take their board and then they create 8 gajillion committees, which is terrible, because then you just have a whole bunch of bureaucracy. Woohoo! The Republicans and Democrats, I know in the state of Kentucky, the way that they handle it is that they just lower the quorum threshold to super duper low. I think it's like 15% of the board constitutes quorum. And so I don't agree with that either. I think that's terrible. But that's how they handle it. That's how they make it so their organization can function with a large board. But yeah, this would be 50 people, right, or 51, I guess, actually, and then the smaller board being between 4 and 7. I think they're much more manageable sizes, while at the same time, hopefully bringing on the best of what they have going on. The Ds and the Rs obviously are very successful at doing something. They put people in office. I don't think they're lining people's pockets. I don't know that that's necessarily the ringing endorsement I'm looking for, but as far as like functionally, like getting people elected, it does seem to work. So that's what they do. The model we have today, the only other organization that's national that uses that, to my knowledge, is the Constitution Party, who is even less successful than the Greens. So that's, as far as governance goes, I looked at least, again, as of a couple years ago, because I looked at all this originally over 2 years ago.
So my pushback on that would be that it's a sort of cargo cult mentality, that we shouldn't necessarily mimic the sorts of things that we see the Republicans and Democrats doing, because we think that just mimicking what they're doing will necessarily make us successful. The real question we need to ask is their success caused by those things, or is it just some correlation? Is there is the fact that they have this very large national committee something that's leading to them to be able to elect all these people, or are the two completely unrelated? I don't see any evidence that the electoral success of the Republicans and Democrats has anything to do with the size of their national committees. What I've seen from the Republicans and Democrats is that they are organized at all levels, whereas we as the Libertarians, we are somewhat organized at the national level. We seem to have our act together at most state levels to have some sort of structure, although there's been a constant joke on the Bylaws Committee that there's a certain state party that if you go to their website, it says insert bylaws here. So we don't know if they actually have bylaws or where they are. Sometimes it can be hard to figure out who's the state chair. If you look at the county level, in many states, the larger counties are organized, smaller counties, not so much. If you look at the town level, the school board precincts, Libertarians not very organized at all. In my opinion, much of the success of the Republicans and Democrats, as someone who has worked the polls many years, I know Ken's probably worked the polls many years as well. When you work the polls for a candidate or just out there petitioning, you notice every single polling place has a Republican handing out literature, Republican committeeman all day long, a Democrat committeeman handing out literature all day long. And what I've noticed is the Republican and Democrat committeemen, when someone walks by, they chat with that person, they know them on a personal level. So if I had to guess what to attribute the electoral success of the Democrats and Republicans to, number one, I would say they're organized all the way down at all levels. Number two, they put a whole lot more money into their races than we do. Number three, their candidates seem to have longer resumes of expertise than ours do in general. So we've had some pretty decent candidates in the past, pretty impressive candidates. But often, even when our candidates are impressive, they would be impressive if they ran at a lower level. At the level that they're running at, generally they don't have that record of achievement that's similar to the Republicans and Democrats. All of those, if I had to guess, I would say those are why the Republicans and Democrats are successful. In addition to their very long history that dwarfs our 50-year history, and the fact that they have the media in their back pocket, they just have a lot more resources than we do. I would not put the fact that their national committees are 50 or 100 or 1,000 people as the reason that Democrats and Republicans have electoral success.
Yeah, I
would agree.
Yeah, I think fuck, there was something that you just said, and then I completely lost it. So Ken, you go ahead.
What I was gonna say, while you're remembering, that's actually what you followed on to support your point is actually kind of my point on what I'm trying to propose, which is that they're organized locally, right? That's the key to success. Local organization absolutely is the key to success. Go out and you have to knock every door in the district. You need to target, micro target. There's all kinds of advanced strategies you can use to actually win a local election. We have the means to do that because we don't have to do a massive media campaign, which is the big elections. You have to spend $1 million in flyers and ads and all the stuff because there's no way you can touch. I mean, a U.S. congressional race is 700-something thousand people, of which, 450, 500,000 vote? Are you going to knock on that many doors? That's not possible. I mean, it's just not possible. But you can absolutely knock on, in Kentucky, our state house races are approximately 44,000 people, which breaks down to roughly 11,000-ish households, 11, 12,000, of which you need, the number that actually vote is around 8,000 or 9,000. And then, of course, you need half the vote. So you need to hit at least about 4,000 or 5,000 doors to have a shot. And then we also have straight party ticket, which influences things, but whatever. The point is, too much of our time is spent in this organization, especially on social media. Read any of the social media groups. Are they talking about local wins anywhere? Or are they talking about, oh my God, I can't believe that this person did this on the LNC. Oh my God, I can't believe that this person said this. All of our national drama takes the focus. And it's because it's an elected position. It's all about who's in that position and who should we boot out and who should we elect next. It is literally the democratization of our national board that promotes the focus of the party and its members on the national board. And that if we take that away, if we make it that it's about the state parties now choosing, right? Well, that takes it one layer back. And the cool part about it is, at that point, people, as noted earlier, right, the muckety mucks, the media, all that, they want to talk to the people with the title. So now we're talking about having a professionally paid chair going out and doing all the glad handing and all that. So they're ideally been elected for that specific role or hired for that specific role. The drama, if there's any, is going to be one layer back, which is not in the forefront, right? That's with the states. It's not in the forefront. It's not the focus. But anybody who's interested in drama is now focused on their state, right? Now, if you take that same model and you take the states and you do the same thing there, which we've done in Kentucky, where the counties actually choose our state leadership, you take the drama out of the state party, and it goes back to the county. And the cool part is most people are pretty cool with the other people in the other within their county, and they talk all the time. They have monthly meetings. They're there all the time. They know these people. So now it becomes extremely accessible for any member to talk to the people in charge of deciding who's our state leadership. And in turn, ideally, if there's for the past, the state leadership would be the ones determining who's at national leadership. And it becomes now all I need to really do to be active and interact in the party in a meaningful way is to come to my county meeting. Because they're the ones that are going to decide state's going to decide national. But the county, that's the people I elect. Those are the people I work with all the time. They're the ones at the county fair booths. They're the ones knocking doors. They're the ones doing the work. We need to focus our attention at the county level. And I believe my proposal does it the best job of focusing people down the chain, at least, if not the local, at least back to state. And I would say that the election of everyone being at large at the national convention continues the cycle of politicizing and inherently making it political, that people are focused on the top and who's elected to what positions, because that's the whole game. It's the national delegation, the national convention is all about every 2 years electing those people. So that's what I would say there.
So I have one quick question.
Just put one bit of pushback real quick. So my concern when we saw the Mises takeover in Reno, that was preceded by a series of state party takeovers, where they went state to state to state, and their goal was to control what delegates were sent to the national convention. And frankly, what I tended to see in several states was that once they got that, they didn't care so much what happened to the state. So some people were put in charge of the state, didn't necessarily do a great job. I think with your proposal setup, the battleground becomes state to state to state, and there is the incentive to go focus more on taking over states, taking over the leadership of states, just so you can determine who's on this national committee, and therefore who gets hired on national staff. And for certain demographics, they care about who controls the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, etc. So fundamentally, I don't see that as a good thing. I don't want to see more state fights. I don't think it's good and I'm not saying that this is something that my proposal solves, because there's still going to be fights at the state level to determine who the national convention delegates are. But I would much rather if activists who go to state conventions, county conventions, etc., if they focus on electing libertarians, if they focus on putting good people in charge of their state party who will do good things to bring their state party forward, instead of having the states be a pawn for what's going on at national.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, though,
I agree with that.
the like you said, most of the reason that those state takeovers happened was purely just for the delegates. So yeah, I don't think either of these proposals necessarily change that. I think Ken's makes it at least I think reframes it slightly to where it's more about, do you actually want these people in your state leadership versus just taking over for the sake of delegates, because I think you're entirely right. Like there were multiple states that completely overhauled their state leadership for the sole purpose of national delegates, where they could have not done that and should have not done that, in my opinion. They elected state chairs that just didn't even really care about being state chairs because they had a majority. And while we're at it, we might as well boot Jen Moore while we're at it if we can.
Well, I think anecdotally, the states that have decentralized elections for their state party, right? And I'll use Ohio because they're my neighbor and I know them the best of not my state. Ohio has a central committee that is elected actually throughout the state, aligned to state Senate districts, as I recall. And they have elections. And then those people get to decide who the executive committee is. So they have they call it central committee, executive committee, whatever, names, labels, not my concern. The point is that they have a bigger board that elects the smaller board. The bigger board can fire and hire the smaller board. I mean, it is basically the central committee, executive committee model that I'm proposing, essentially. And it works, right? So when Mises was rolling through everywhere, they were decentralized enough that you can't take over a state nearly as easily. Now, that said, it still can be done. And the reality is, and it's still true to this day, the people who show up are the party. The party's made up of who shows up, right? And if any particular caucus can draw people out, hell, I fought a battle years ago, and I brought a small army to convention, and basically tripled what the other side brought. And handily, that's actually what led to some of the bylaws that we have where, you can't give money to your friends and stuff like that. That was all in reaction. That was that convention, cleaning up some rules. So the point is that you can bring a big group to the convention 1 year. Absolutely. The question is, can you maintain it? Even new people look at, and I like to refer to them as first wave, second wave, and now third wave Mises, right? The first wave Mises people have been around long enough. You'll notice they don't really lockstep with the head. They think on their own now, is I guess what I'll say for the most part. The second wave is getting there, and it's just a matter of time because these people are libertarians, right? You can take advice from people and you can trust people for a while, but after a while you're like, I don't know if I agree with that. And once you get more familiar with the organization, it kind of works its way out. In Kentucky, we do have 2-year terms. Well, we did before we got rid of electing them at state convention. We had 2-year terms for our state leadership, but we also had mechanisms to call special conventions and do recalls, which are way more reasonable to do at a state level than you could ever do at national. The idea of holding a national convention to recall leadership is insanity, right? I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that, right? Like trying to get all 10,000. I know there was somebody said had proposed that the people who were at that convention should be allowed to do a petition to recall people. There are a number of people that won't even be libertarians by that time, right? I mean, people come, people go. Are you going to get some Republican or Democrat that hates our party to be deciding, they got mad and quit and rage quit and whatever and became a Democrat, Republican, something else? Hell, I've seen plenty of them turn into socialists, whatever. Do you really want those people learning or deciding who our leadership is now? Because, whatever. You can only have the people that are now here deciding what happens now. And I guess that's my point, is that we at a state level, you can have recall mechanisms. You can have reasonable ways to get rid of bad leadership using a democratic process. But it's not really possible at national. And that inherently is the problem, is that we elect people nationally, but there's no mechanism to get rid of them after that happens, really, not by the same group that put them there. And so voters' remorse is not able to be, the feedback isn't there directly anyway. I don't know. I'm looking for sets of checks and balances. And I don't know how long we want to go at this, David, but I will say that of all the things, I will support if somebody does move to just do the flip-flop, right, and delete the at-larges versus the regionals. I would be far more apt to support that proposal. It's not as complicated as mine. I still think there's problems with it, But I personally think it's a step in the better direction of the states having more control over the LNC, not less, which I believe is the key to the LNC actually being focused on what the states actually need.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't want to take you guys for too long. So maybe kind of some semblance of closing arguments here. Wrap up what you guys have already said, and kind of another little push for why people in DC should vote for your proposal. We'll start with Chuck this time.
Well, wait, David, I opened, so we should give Chuck close.
That's.
Unless Chuck objects to that. I'll let Chuck choose. Which one do you want, Chuck? First, or you want to go second, last, or last? Up to you, buddy.
It doesn't matter. You can go first. I'll go last, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair in debate rules, right? If you go first at the beginning, you go first at the end. That way I got first word, you get last word. We'll make it fair. So
fair enough.
Cool. All right. So just kind of re-summarizing what I just said, my goal is to focus the national party on the needs of the states. Ideally, we would get a system where it's decided by the state parties. Ideally, we get a system that literally just, every time they make a motion, ask the question, is this what the state chairs want? It's a great system. We have a similar one here in Kentucky. The state party, literally every major decision that's made, the state party asks, has anybody checked with the county parties? Is this what the county parties want? And that's a great way to focus the party in the direction I believe it needs to be focused. Instead of being focused on the drama at the top and who's popular and who's the cool kid, it's, are we getting results? Are we getting what we need done? Is the LNC actually helping our state parties grow? I can't help state parties beyond that. Obviously, I would encourage your state parties to look at adopting a similar system where you start focusing your efforts not on state convention, but on county conventions and what you're doing locally. And then it becomes about who's doing the most locally and who deserves to lead locally. And that will in turn, that's the goal, right? Get everything focused local, because that'll in turn net us the best chances of achieving individual liberty with the means and the tools that we have today. So again, I'm not saying it's perfect. I would like my system. I don't think it has a snowball's chance in Hades of actually being heard. I think it'll be called out of order or whatever. And so I support any system that increases the voice of the states. I would support the alternative plan to dump the at-larges and keep the officers and the regionals. So that's my close. I'm available, obviously, and I know Chuck will be too, but I'm available through my Facebook page. If you haven't checked that out, it's fb.me/ken.moulman. It's the hardest part, spelling my last name. So, find me there, and happy to answer any questions or to continue either publicly or privately on the matter.
As someone who's had to type your name 17 times this week, I can say that's the hardest part.
Yeah, and I should have said one more thing. Thanks for it's been over 2 hours we've been at this. Thanks to everybody who got to the end. Thanks. And David, thank you for hosting this. I really do appreciate that.
Hell yeah, my absolute pleasure. Dr. Moulton.
Thank you so much for hosting us, David. So before I pitch my own proposals, I'll just say I have enormous amount of respect for Ken Moulman. I've known him for many, many years. He's done a lot of great things for the party. He hasn't even plugged himself very well because he has a website, fixthelp.com. Fixthelp.com. You can go to read about his proposal. So you go check that out. If you want to learn about my proposal, there's a survey that was sent out this week about the first six bylaws proposals. This is number 5 is the restructure the LNC, restructure the LNC proposal. If you want to get more into the weeds of the bylaws committee, we hold meetings. It used to be every 2 weeks on Thursday nights. Now we're getting to an every week type of thing as we get close to the convention. And we have used to be a Google group. I think now it's like Microsoft something or other, where you can follow our email discussions or you can listen to the Zoom meetings. If you go to what's it called? Lpedia. If you go to Lpedia, you can type in 2024 Bylaws Committee. and you can find this really detailed information on everything we've done. So all the proposals we've considered, including Mr. Moulton's proposals, which he put forth, and this proposal. You can go look at the actual text of all these proposals. Once we adopt our final report, it'll be up there as well. So fundamentally, I agree with Mr. Moulton about what the problems are that we want to solve. I think the LNC is I think the LNC right now is too big to be effective. And I think shrinking the LNC is the way to go. So Ken's proposal in some way expands it, in other ways shrinks it. I don't think his way is the right approach, because so first of all, hiring staff and calling them an executive committee or whatever you're calling it, I don't think that has the right hierarchical structure. I don't think we're necessarily always going to be in a financial position to pay those people. And if some are volunteer and some are paid, it just can get weird. I don't like the indirectness of electing it. And it's just a really big change. I think the proposal that's being put forth by the Bylaws Committee that I'm supported is a much more modest change. We're really not adding much. We're deleting stuff. So we're deleting regional representatives. We're for the at large, all we're doing is we're changing the number 5 to the number 7. It's a real simple change. It's we've had at large representatives in the structure that we're talking about for many decades, so people are familiar with that structure, and it's paired with a more representative voting system, a cumulative voting, which I think many people are familiar with how cumulative voting works, and there's a lot of people who favor cumulative voting, including Mr. Moulton. So I think cumulative voting is a big step forward as well. And the two are inextricably linked. Not to say that you can't do cumulative voting without eliminating the regionals, but when we eliminate regionals, part of the selling point is that it will be a representative system. So we are not going to allow the majority to run the table. We're going to allow minority viewpoints through organized voting. I think it would be a big step forward to shrink the size of the board. I think it would be a big step forward to allow minority representation there. And this certainly will be put before the delegates. They'll certainly get an opportunity to debate and vote on it. And I think it stands a fairly realistic chance of passing. Would I put money on it passing? I mean, I don't know if I would consider the odds better than 50-50, but if I had to like set the odds on this passing, I would say I'd probably put it something like 35-40%, which I think is pretty good. And in my opinion, passing this proposal is the single best change that we could make to our bylaws to improve the functioning of the party. So I would highly encourage delegates to consider this proposal. If you have concerns about the proposal or objections, please fill out the survey that was sent out and comment. We would like to hear your feedback for ways that we can either make the proposal better or we can better explain it, because some of the objections that we've heard aren't really problems with the proposal. It comes from a misunderstanding of this proposal. So thank you for the opportunity to better communicate the proposal, and I look forward to seeing a lot of you at the National Convention in Washington, D.C.
Oh yeah, guys! Thank you so much for doing this. I told Ken, because Ken and I have been talking about his proposal for quite some time, like LP Happy Hour and even off of that. And I've actually been kind of trying to put something like this together just to talk about it publicly. And so when he came to me with the idea of you, Dr. Moulton, kind of arguing the other proposal and being able to give pushback on his, I was 100% on board, because this is a conversation that I think really needed to happen. And I think it, not to toot my own horn here at all, but I think it's good that people can go back and watch this if they have questions and want to hear things articulated a little bit better. So thank you guys so much for coming on and doing this and having this discussion. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. This has been fun. This is one of the most active chats that I've had on a show in quite some time. So I love you all. And definitely, as
David, real quick.
Go for it.
David, real quick, I just want to note that email that Dr. Moulton mentioned is titled Bylaws and Rules Committee and Platform Committee Survey. Look for it, because I didn't see that originally. I'm glad that Dr. Moulton pointed it out. So
awesome. I don't think I got that email because I'm not actually on National's email list.
I believe
there
there's also a link to the survey on the National website, so you don't even need to receive the email. I think you can go and follow the link to fill out the survey if you'd like.
All right. Hell yeah. Again, guys, like the video, subscribe to the channel, go check out our sponsors. They're all super awesome, great liberty-oriented businesses. So go check them out, and we'll catch you back here next week. And until then, keep up the fight.